Katie Horvath, and this is Carmen Lemieux, Sarnia Lambton's Liberal candidate for our 2019 federal election. Thanks for meeting with me today and allowing yourself to be recorded for the on-camera section of Valley Review.
Thank you, Katie. It's a pleasure to be here.
So before we talk about policy and the Liberal platform, I'd like to get to know you a little bit. I know you spent a lot of your professional life in the education system, so could you tell us a little bit about both your career and your volunteer work before politics?
So my career is not a straight line into education. I actually have a degree in journalism, and I worked for Environment Canada when I graduated in their communications department for Parks Canada. And then I came to Dow Chemical, where I worked for 5 years, from 1986 to 1991. And while I was doing my work at Dow, I did a lot of things with schools and really discovered the love of teaching. So I became a teacher, went back to school, became a teacher, and later on did my master's, eventually became a principal. So for the last 10 years, I'm retired now, but the last 10, 11 years I was an administrator with the school board. So I was principal at 3 different schools. I retired out of Hannah, and before that I was principal at École Hillcrest because I speak both French and English, in Petrolia, a French immersion school there, and principal at Arrow Road, French immersion school here in Sarnia. So I've got both county and county and rural urban experience.
Okay, great. And how about community involvement, not necessarily paid work, but involvement in the community in general?
I've done lots of that, and when I think well over a dozen different organizations. I was on the board of the YMCA and on committees at United Way. But a lot of my volunteer work has involved children. So I have 2 children myself. They're 21 now, but I did a lot of work running a drop-in center in the downtown as a play group. I volunteered for that. I had twins, so I was president of the Parents of Multiple Births Association. Now that I'm retired, one of the things that I do volunteer in is a breakfast program at one of the local schools in the downtown because that's where I live. And I also volunteer at Blue Water Health in an elder life program working with seniors.
Awesome. Thank you. So why did you decide to run this federal election for the Liberal candidate space?
Well, when I retired 2 years ago, I became very involved helping my own parents who unfortunately had become quite ill, and I moved in to help look after them. And I got a really good feel for challenges facing seniors. My father eventually passed away, but I don't regret having those 6 months with him. But then I came out of it and realized I'd been so absorbed with my own family situation, I didn't realize that, or I did realize we had elected a conservative provincial government, and all of the cutbacks that are happening there, I do not want them to happen federally. I feel the Liberal government's done a lot to help seniors and children, and I don't want to see that important work cut. It's really important to me that we have a strong voice who advocates for the more vulnerable in our population.
Right. Okay. So going back to the topic of education, one of the first items online for the Liberal agenda is help for college and university students. So what does that plan look like, and why do you feel that's important?
Well, it's important because I think as we're moving forward with a lot of different jobs for young people, it's not necessarily a university. It could be in the skilled trades. So I think we need to make sure that locally we have a deficit in that area, and we have an aging population. So in order to take advantage of that, I think we need to make sure that younger workers get the skills training that they need. So there's an apprenticeship training program that I'm really excited about because it especially helps women in non-traditional trades, like red seal trades. And I'm very fortunate my niece is one of those apprentices doing her apprenticeship for an electrician. And there is a program under the Liberal government. They get $3,000 a year of their first 2 years of apprenticeship training, and then $2,000 when they graduate. So I think that helps. But for people who are pursuing any type of college or university education, I know there have been cuts to the Ontario student loan program, and that's hurting. The Canada Student Loaning Grant program has been increased by the federal government under the Liberals by 50%, and in our platform we've introduced lots of new measures to help For example, 2 years before you have to repay and no interest accruing. And if young people in school have children and have debt, they're given until the age of their youngest child, age 5, before they have to start repaying. So I think those things show me that there's a lot of value in helping our younger students.
Okay, great, thank you.
And I have 2 children of my own away at university, so that's really important to me as well.
Right, okay. So while I was researching your platform, I repeatedly saw the hashtag #ChooseForward, particularly when it came to climate change. So what is the Liberal stance on climate change, and how does your party propose that we approach that issue?
Well, having been the party in government and having to make some tough choices and being criticized for them, I think we are the party that has done the most thus far. When you look at our climate action incentive, which puts a price on pollution, but still returns that money and sometimes more depending on how much you reduce your use of vehicles and heating, you get what was taken in the climate action incentive, you get rebated back to you on your income tax. Plus, there is 10% that is given to institutions like schools and hospitals and small businesses to help them retrofit and become more energy efficient. So that's one way that we've already moved forward, and we have a plan that's been in place. In our platform, of course, we've announced some other new initiatives in terms of planting 2 billion trees, so that will help mitigate carbon emissions. We have also done things like expand the protected areas, or we're planning to expand protected areas such that it's 25% by 2025, and that's a big advance under previous governments. So protected areas would be land and oceans, and our goal eventually is 30% of land and oceans by 2030. And then we have the net zero emissions target, and the way I understand net zero, so we talked about there are still going to be some carbon emissions, but things like tree planting help to mitigate that and bring that down to zero. So that's an ambitious goal for 2050. And I attended the climate action rally on Friday last week.
Okay.
And as an educator, I was so impressed with what our youth are telling us, telling older generations. And I think it's going to be like a lot of other things I've experienced with youth. When you look at the advances in technology, they took off and brought us along. And I think environment is going to be another example of that. And a vote for Liberals is a vote to continue with that plan. We can't let the Conservatives win because they're already telling us they're going to take off the price on pollution, and that's just not right.
Okay, thank you. The Liberal Party claims real progress has been made in investing in the middle class. So could you expand a little bit more on how that was done and how the Liberals plan to continue protecting the middle class?
Well, one of the first things that was done was raising taxes on the top 1% earners and reducing it on low and middle income earners. So that was the first initiative right out the gate. And using that money for things like the Canada Child Benefit. Under a previous government, it was approximately $1,200 a year, but an average family of 4 might receive up to $6,800 a year, and that's for things like food and clothing and school supplies, where the family gets to decide. There isn't a tax credit for music lessons and sports because for some families, while they may want to do that, other families just want to get help with rent and food and clothing for their kids. Right. So we're leaving it up to the families to make the best decisions about that. And going forward, there of course are more improvements to that. For children under 1, an additional $1,000. So that will help again with expenses. And for families that are looking to buy their first home, the first-time home buyers incentive is there. And for markets where it's a little more expensive than here, Toronto and Vancouver and Victoria, increasing the ceiling for which you can buy a home because those markets are priced so much higher. Right. So that will go a long way to helping reduce people's interest that they're paying in their mortgage payment, because it's 5 to 10% that the government will give you to help you with a down payment. So that's another way to help the middle class. And and I look at seniors as well. So seniors, there have been improvements to old age security and guaranteed income supplement, and our new platforms talking about improvements by 10% to old age security, and also increasing the survivor benefit from the Canada Pension Plan to 25%. So when I volunteer with seniors, they just tell me, I want to make my own decisions. Just give me the resources so that I can decide.
Right.
Because what I've learned is no one program fits everybody.
Mm-hmm.
And they want to make their own decisions to be as independent as possible as they can be.
Right. Okay, great, thank you. Your platform also states that gun crime in Canada is on the rise and that Andrew Scheer's policy on guns was written by the gun lobby. Could you comment on that?
Well, so under the Liberal platform, we are looking at a ban on assault rifles, and also allowing urban centers and cities to decide if they want to have their own handgun ban. And I do speak from some personal experience. I was telling you that nobody takes a straight line out of high school. I was in the Naval Reserve when I graduated from high school when I was 18. So I learned how to fire a Sterling machine gun and a rifle and a Browning pistol. Nobody needs that kind of firepower. Nobody needs an automatic weapon. But for sustenance and for farmers, a rifle, we're not taking away the long gun registry. I feel that assault type automatic weapons for the police and for the military, for no one else. It's just too dangerous a situation, and we've seen from École Polytechnique and the shooting at the mosque in Quebec City, the real damage that can be done with that type of weapon. So I fully support where the Liberals are going with this.
Okay, thank you. So I did attend the All Candidates debate on social issues at the Dante Club. Poverty and the housing crisis were among some of the topics discussed. What is the Liberal approach to ending these issues for Canadians?
So poverty and housing, I think when we look at the Canada Child Benefit and improvements to seniors funding, we throw around a lot of statistics, but 900,000 people being lifted out of poverty since a Liberal government in the last 4 years, and also a 20% reduction in poverty levels. But for every grand statistic we have, there are still people slipping through the cracks.
Right.
And I see that I saw that in my work as a principal. Only been retired 2 years, so I did start to see the shift. For families, having more that they could spend on food and clothing for their children. I started to see that, and I tell the story about, I had one parent who, in order for her child to have shoes, she gave her own. And I watched the mother walk in barefoot into the school when she brought her daughter to school. And, that doesn't sit well with me. Mm-hmm. It also doesn't sit well with me. I live in the downtown core, just down from a homeless shelter, and I've lived there for 30 years. And one of the things that I did as a neighbor in the downtown core was become very involved in retaining affordable housing. So in the 90s and the early 2000s, there was an initiative by some developers to tear down homes in the core, and a group of neighbors got together, and I was one of the people who went to the Ontario Municipal Board as an appellant, and we were successful in keeping that housing stock. So it's a really important issue to me. I am disappointed that we haven't accessed as much as I'd like to see the National Housing Strategy. So the National Housing Strategy has a plan for new housing to help refurbish existing, and there's also a plan starting in January of 2020 to give people who qualify a grant of $2,500 a year to help with their rent. So that will still happen, but I'd like to see, that's one area I would like to work on, is getting more affordable housing, new units in the downtown core, and it's got to be working with developers and municipalities to access that housing strategy. And I've spoken publicly many times that is really concerning to me, because I see it every day in my community. Walk down to the park, I still see people sleeping in the park at night. And I think we could do better. I know there are a lot of pressures on our community from, students at the college, and also from seniors who want to downsize into a smaller home, and people who are coming to work. And the great news is our industry is expanding, but where do they stay? Right. And then I do see there's a lot of speculation, people buying homes and fixing them up and maybe renting them out for a time and selling them, which is getting in the way of people getting their first home.
Right.
So I think on the national housing strategy level, I'd like to do more.
Okay, great. So the long-term drinking water advisories in the First Nations communities, I had read Trudeau pledged to end 91 advisories by 2021, but that hasn't happened yet. So I was wondering if you could comment on that human rights issue.
Well, we're on our way. So in our platform, you'll see that 87 have been lifted. So there are still many more left. I think it's even beyond an additional 4. But there's no question that they are putting resources and money into that. So I think that having lifted 87 goes a long way towards doing that. They are in a remote area, and so there are challenges that we don't have. We're very fortunate here that Aamjiwnaang, gets access to municipal water, but it's the more remote areas that pose special challenges, and that's expensive, but the government has, and the party, have committed to making sure that that happens.
Okay, thank you. So there was an issue I was reading, not creating legislation for electoral reform, and then going forward with the pipeline, SNC-Lavalin. Regardless of where voters stand on the issues, there's been just a number of matters that Trudeau was criticized on for regarding some dishonesty. So how could trust be restored in the minds of voters? And why do you personally feel that despite these incidents, Trudeau is still your top choice for leadership?
Well, many issues that you've mentioned, yes, he is still my top choice. I believe in the values of the party, and I think he has represented those to the best of his ability. When I look at an issue like SNC-Lavalin, I'm proud that he waived solicitor-client privilege. I'm proud that he waived cabinet confidentiality. And these were difficult things to do, and locally that affects us as well. It's not just the people who work at SNC-Lavalin, but I've had retirees approach me and say, I'm really worried about the sustainability of that company. What's going to happen to my pension? So I think the way he's advocating for everyone, I think speaks to the fact of his ethics. I think that he's looking at many people and trying to help many people. And so you mentioned some other issues. Do you mind if you tell me them again?
Yeah, so he was elected in 2015 with the idea of electoral reform. Yeah, and that, it hasn't happened, obviously. We're coming into the new one, so could you comment on that, or what happened?
Well, electoral reform, even if we just look at Sarnia, Lambton, the outcome could have been much different, because when you look at the votes to the left, they were far more than the votes on the right. So what would that have looked like here is something we will never know. But I know from what he has discussed with us at Candidate College and other forums that he looked into it in terms of holding consultations, doing consulting with groups, and the consensus he came to was that there was not enough understanding of what that would mean. And what we need to have is clarity. And when we look at things like Brexit, and I look at things as someone who was born and raised in Montreal, when we look at votes to separate or not, it's very clear, no pun intended, we need a lot of clarity and understanding. And I know that there have been plebiscites, for example, in BC, where people said, no, we don't want to move forward. So I don't think he's ruled it out completely. So I wouldn't count that one out entirely, but through consultation, he's made a different decision, and I respect him for talking to people.
Okay, thank you. So going through each of the parties' individual platform items, there's obviously a lot of ground to cover in terms of unique issues in 2019. So in your personal opinion, what do you think are the most pressing issues that face Canadians today? We can say 3.
Well, 3 right off the top. The first one, of course, climate change. We hear no jobs on a dead planet. What's the plan B for the planet? And I think that's being driven by a lot of youth who are the ones who are going to inherit what we leave them, my own children included. So for me, I think the Liberal Party is best positioned. We have a balanced approach. We have already started down our path, and people, it's fully transparent, and people can see what it is we intend to do and what we will continue to do. So that's number one for me. The second, and part of that too, is our shift to a green economy. We can't overlook the fact, especially here in Sarnia, Lambton, that we need to make that shift, but we need to do it in a way that still respects our economy and helps people retain jobs. So we have a lot of expertise. You know, the local economy has expertise and know-how and training. We've just got to harness that as we move to green. And the Liberal government's shown a lot of support for Sarnia in terms of funding the Centre for Excellence in Biotech and also woodland biofuels. So a job for a welder in a plant that takes biomass waste and transforms it to ethanol, there's still a job for a welder and a pipe fitter and an electrician. It's just a different feedstock. So I think reassuring people that as we transition to a green economy, the Liberal government's there to help you get the skills you need, to help you get the training that you need, and to work with employers to incentivize that. So that's kind of fits in with the first one, but definitely under healthcare, mental health care, and tied into that, the opioid crisis. And I know the Liberal governments have announced $6 billion. It's a big sum of money, but what's that going to look like for mental health care and home care? But I think it needs to be embedded in the Canada Health Act to make provinces responsible. We're still waiting for the province of Ontario to come up with the Withdrawal Management Treatment Centre here. And so we need to hold provinces to account because they've signed these bilateral agreements. We need to see real action from them.
Okay, thank you. So our current MP received only 38% of the vote in the last federal election. So speaking of the electoral reform question, so that translates, as you said, over 60% of residents in Sarnia Lambton voted for somebody else. So if you were elected, what would you do to ensure the fair representation of the majority of people in Sarnia Lambton?
It's definitely going to be an interesting election, and I say that from a personal perspective, but I see a lot of engagement by people, and especially young people. So I always resort back to this answer when I talk about my job as a principal. And I was very honored when Justin Trudeau was asked in a local televised interview, what's his best skill when it came to being Prime Minister, and he said, I'm a teacher. And that really resonated with me because I think my job as a principal, I had to work with many people to solve very complex problems, mental health, poverty, addiction, and then sometimes involving criminality and the law and the police. And I have discovered there's no one simple answer. You cannot say, well, this is what we're going to do. You have to talk to people. You have to consult with them. You have to bring as many people as possible to the table. And it's not enough to make the decision. Once you've made the decision, you have to monitor it and bring the people back and say, we decided to do this. Now how is it going for you? And that's the way I've always operated, and it's sometimes been a detriment because it's all-encompassing and takes a lot of time, but I think it's what people expect, and I think I have a lot of experience doing that, and that's the same type of effort I would put into being Member of Parliament.
Okay, great, thank you. So I am honestly a bit on the fence as to who I'm voting for this election, and I've been asking this to all the candidates. Why should I vote for you?
Well, you have to think of your vote as which one is going to help the environment the most. And that's my advice to people. If we have a Conservative government, they've already told us they're going to take away the price on pollution, and then what? We're in the dark ages. We're stepping too far back. So it's a big responsibility. I'm glad you're taking it very seriously, and as everyone should. And just that's my answer. Just think very carefully about how shouldn't be a Conservative vote.
Great, thank you. So I really do appreciate your time and your willingness to answer these questions, especially with the camera in your face. But that is all the questions that I've prepared for you today. I just want to give you the opportunity if there's anything else you'd like to add that we didn't touch on today for the people watching.
J'aimerais parler en français un petit peu, si je peux. I would like to speak a little bit in French. That is one area that I would assume people know because of my French last name, but I think it would be an asset working at the federal level of government. Being able to work with all members of Parliament across the country is something that I would bring as a member of Parliament.
Okay, great. Awesome. Well, thanks again,
Okay.
and good luck.
Oh, thank you. Merci. Appreciate that.